So this is not your grandfather's submersible.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. OceanGate Expedition CEO Stockton Rush once explained why he preferred not to hire 50-year-old white guys with military experience to pilot his company's vessel. He said, "When I started the business, one of the things you'll find, there are other sub-operators out there, but they typically have gentlemen who are ex-military submariners, and you'll see a whole bunch of 50-year-old white guys." That is what Rush said to Teledyne Marine in a 2020 Zoom interview. Well, except that's exactly who he has on his sub with him during the fatal dive 3 years later. P.H. Nargile was ex-military, and at various times he was also in charge of piloting his submersible, particularly around the wreck of the Titanic itself, which can be tricky to maneuver around.
I wanted our team to be younger, to be inspirational, and I'm not going to inspire a 16-year-old to go pursue marine technology. But a 25-year-old, who's a sub-pilot or a platform operator or one of our techs can be inspirational. And so we've really tried to get very intelligent, motivated, younger individuals involved because we're doing things that are completely new.
It may also be that he wanted green employees because they were cheap and wouldn't tell him what to do, especially after his run-in and legal issues with Lockridge.
We're taking approaches that are used largely in the aerospace industry is related to safety and some of the preponderance of checklists, things we do for risk assessments and things like that are more aviation related than ocean related.
I'm not really sure how aviation safety and aviation engineering translates to submersibles. I think the Titan tragedy in sum proves that it doesn't. It also proves that Rush couldn't leave the psychology at the door and focus on the deep sea engineering side rather than his education, which was engineering for big blue skies and outer space. Totally different environment.
And we can train people to do that. We can train someone to pilot the sub. We use a game controller so anybody can drive the sub.
How long is the training? Is it an hour? And so what you have here is somebody thinking like a pilot and a venture capitalist, not like an engineer. Personally, I think it's absurd, the idea of piloting a submersible. Basically, it's a craft that sinks vertically down, basically just gravity that's working on it, and then rises vertically up with a little squiggly movement at the bottom. There's very little navigating or piloting that's going on. By far the most thinking and calculations and responses that needs to be happening is what is happening to the structure as we descend, and then also to some extent navigation in the sense of where are we at this depth, where are we at this depth. And the Titan was terrible in that respect. They often got lost, they often lost communication. Now, when we take this question, is the deep ocean no country for old men? Neil Armstrong learned to fly a lot earlier than Stockton Rush. He was learning to fly at 15 and he was a pilot by age 16, even before he got his driver's license, or for that matter, his high school diploma. Armstrong always felt that it was engineering that got people onto the moon, not Top Gun piloting. One of the quotes Neil Armstrong is famous for is he said, "I am and ever will be a White Sox pocket protector nerdy engineer, born under the second law of thermodynamics, steeped in steam tables, in love with free body diagrams, transformed by Laplace, and propelled by compressive flow." Armstrong also said something else. He said, "You might think going to the moon is the purview of young dreamers, but Kennedy made his famous moon speech as a 60-year-old, about the same age Stockton Rush was when he died going down to the Titanic." So how do we answer this question? Is experience necessary in the deep sea? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. By the way, if you haven't subscribed, I want you to please take a look at this graphic. And do you notice that 75% of people viewing my videos aren't subscribed? And I'm probably not going to continue doing the Titan analysis if these numbers continue. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So again, the question arises, is the deep sea no country for old men? Well, these are the respective ages of the Titan crew who lost their lives. Paul-Henri Nargeolet, P.H. Nargeolet, age 77. Stockton Rush, the second oldest, at age 61. Hamish Harding, 58 years old. Shahzada Dawood, age 48, and his son Suleiman Dawood, age 19. That's an average age of 52.6 years old. If you take the teenager out of the sample, the average age jumps to 61. So what do you think? Is the deep sea no country for old men? Is that the lesson we learn from the Titan tragedy? I do think one needs to profile Stockton Rush's approach and compare it to classic submersible psychology, and we're going to do that in a moment. But strictly speaking, in my opinion, I'm not sure age has got anything to do with it. James Cameron is a senior statesman of the submersible industry at 68 years old. He was 57 years old, about the same age as Hamish Harding, and slightly younger than Stockton Rush when he made it down to the Mariana Trench. As far as I know, Victor Vescovo is also in his late 50s. Rob Hall, the Kiwi leader of the Adventure Consultants team, was only 35 years old when he perished on Mount Everest. Scott Fisher, his American rival from Mountain Madness, was 40 years old. So I don't know if you can make the argument that younger men are better at making certain calculations or decisions in high-risk environments. Personally, I don't think age is as big a factor as competition and ego. And competitiveness and ego are fairly independent of age in many people, although I personally would say some people, as they mature, become less egotistical and less competitive. But of course, some become more. Stockton Rush perhaps became more. In this interview with Teledyne Systems, you can hear Rush saying that he values captains who are inspirational. He values inspirational almost personality over experience. Also saying that anybody can drive a sub. Well, once again, one has a Captain Kirk mentality here. Oftentimes when I've analyzed Rush, I get a sense that he's more salesman and marketing pitchman, is more about gimmicks than a sort of balls-to-the-walls engineer or explorer. He talks about inspirational young people with no experience. But when that doesn't work, remember he did this interview in 2020, he then recruits P.H. Nargeolet, who is a very inspirational 77-year-old. Nargeolet has visited the Titanic wreck more than anyone else in the world, 37 times, 4 times more than Titanic director James Cameron. And I think because they were in a sort of race, Nargeolet was eager to notch up one more dive to his belt. But the point is, your two, I guess, world record holders are a 77-year-old and a 67-year-old. So rather than saying the deep sea is no country for old men, perhaps it is the perfect country for old men. If that's the case, then what is the psychology that doesn't fit into this environment? And I think we come by that psychology by quoting a recent statement by the co-founder of OceanGate. It's really just come out in the last couple of days, where Sonline basically told Insider, he said, over the course of 15 years, that company's probably employed like 200 and has dived dozens of people. That's a reference to OceanGate. And he says, and you're only hearing it from about 4 people in terms of criticism. Well, you can kind of understand why OceanGate employees either don't say anything or they're not allowed to say anything. Anyway, Sonline went on to say, common sense seems to indicate these must be the vocal minority because there are a lot of other people that aren't speaking up who disagree with these 4. Well, who are they? There are not too many people who know the finer details, the finer science about submersibles and this kind of niche area of engineering. Anyway, Sonline said of Rush, quote, the world only has one foremost expert on using carbon fiber to go in the deep oceans, and he's gone now. That sounds dangerously like OceanGate still hasn't learned the fundamental lesson, which is that you don't build deep-sea submersibles using carbon fiber. This feels a lot like stuck, rigid thinking, which is sometimes the purview of old thinkers, but I think it can also be the purview of young people as well, stubborn youngsters who don't like being told what to do. So specifically, what sort of thinking is the ideal for a submersible engineer? I'm not an expert, but I would say patience, especially in this kind of thing where it takes a long time to get down to the bottom of the ocean, takes a long time to get up, takes a long time to certify craft, takes a long time to test craft and all that. So I would say patience and being conservative are in a sense a given. But there are also counterintuitive traits needed as well that are in a sense contrary to patience, such as verve, and contrary to being conservative, such as creativity and innovation. I think Rush's mistake was being a maverick or trying to be a maverick in a high-risk environment, and that he really knew very little about it. I think you've got to be careful going into a field that you're new to. And somehow he convinced himself that he did know a lot about this environment. You kind of get a bit of a know-it-all attitude from him. And I think this is the critical area, the critical type of psychology that was the most dangerous to himself and everyone else was arrogance. Arrogance, whether on the moon, Mount Everest, or the bottom of the sea, is the worst kind of thinking. But just to demonstrate how it's not as black and white as you might imagine, let me ask you, if you had been the captain of the Titanic and your arrogance had led to a situation where the bow of the ship is now heading straight into an iceberg and there's no way of avoiding it, what would you have done differently than just trying to sort of steer away from it that could have saved both the ship and everyone's lives? The answer, hitting the iceberg head on. And there are quite a few examples of ships that did that and lived to sail another day. No loss of life. The ship took the impact and was able to save onto to port. If you want me to tell you that story, the stories of that kind of situation, and you are a subscriber to this channel, let me know in the comments. So you see, the same arrogance that gets men and women out of their beds and on spaceships, on the moon, on mountain summits, building big unsinkable ships, supposedly, that same arrogance has got to be tempered in some way with a kind of humility. And so how do you have them together? So can you see it's just very difficult to have the right kind of hubris in a situation where you are, by design, a confident person going into the unknown, living life on your own terms. I suppose what one has to maintain, no matter how old, rich, poor, famous, or unknown you are, is the ability to listen to one's own environment. Can you listen to what's going on around you without being that sound being drowned out by the thoughts in one's own head? And so can you respond to that in spite of your grand design for yourself? I have my doubts whether we are very good at this as a society, which suggests arrogance is hardwired into us as a species, and if we're not careful, it will be our undoing. Just ask Robert Oppenheimer.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
If you're a subscriber and you want me to talk about Oppenheimer and his psychology, please let me know in the comments. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.